Good morning and welcome back to the workshop. In today's episode we will build a pair of single bevel trestles. This is inspired by Robin Clevett of Skill Builder. Not only is it going to help me to build the worktop and the workbench and everything else, but it will also give me a little bit of practice getting back into using the handsaw and also just doing measuring and cutting that I haven't done in a little while, other than the build. So I've got my timber cut already. My legs I've cut at 750 and the top's at 900. I'm using 3x2 CLS. The legs will go down slightly in length as we cut them, obviously. They're not going to go up. But it should be a nice, comfortable height for me to work at, about this height. But it'll be wide enough, because I put the tops at 900, that we should have lots of space to work on without it being too cumbersome. What I will do is put the legs slightly inset from the ends of the tops. And if we do want to cut the tops down, we can always do that later. But we can't make them longer. So we'll make them too long, if anything, and then cut them down later. So first things first is we need to measure out on the legs the first bevel. And I've put together a little jig similar to Robin's in that it's at 15 degrees. I've cut my 15-degree angle on there. So we're going to transfer that now onto the legs. So we need to do 2 in one direction, like so, and 2 in the other direction, so that we don't end up with 4 of the same leg. We will obviously do 8 legs because we're going to have 2 tables. We're then going to get the square that I've left somewhere here. Where have I put the square? Square. And just transfer those lines around. And the lower part of the initial bevel will become the higher part of the second bevel, just so that the legs, once they're all assembled, splay in the right direction. So you have to do this off the side of the bench here because of the depth of this jig. We'll mark out 1. 2. Flip that around. 3. And line that up. 4. So we have our legs marked out, which we will now cut. Now the difficulty in this cut is it's a compound cut. So we're not just cutting straight down, we're also cutting slightly at an angle in both directions. There's one. And try and get it as close to the line as possible so that they're all fairly similar. But ultimately it doesn't make too much of a difference, because once we've got it all, the legs assembled with the tops, we're going to cut the legs down to an equal height anyway. So if we get it slightly wrong here by a millimetre or two, it doesn't really matter. Now going the other way. Making sure to follow our line as we cut. And the last one for this one. And we should, if all was done well, end up with a lovely little shape where four pieces, four different pieces form a point, like so. Which should also mean that if we were to lift them up and splay the legs to flat, that should be roughly a 15-degree angle. So that's one set done. We will put those to one side. We're going to use this side. Now, I think one of the good things about this is you don't need a lot of tools. I've got a pencil, a little jig, a square just to transfer lines around. You don't need that. We could use this. I've got a saw. I'll use a drill just to drive the screws later, but we could do that by hand. And a set of chisels. I don't think we're going to need those terribly, but we'll use them. So the second set of legs here. Again, we're just going to do the same thing on these. We'll get them lined up. Do a mark on each of the legs where we're going to do the first bevel. Flip the jig around. And do the same thing on the other side. Turn these around again, and remember that the low point of the first bevel, it becomes the high point of the second bevel. I'm just going to transfer our marks around on these. Like so. and then mark again the secondary bevel, which is the high point on the second bevel, is the low point on the first bevel. So there's one. Two. Flip the jig around. Three. And last one. Four. So we're going to cut those again, exactly the same process. Just cut the angles on these, and then we can start with the tops. That's two. Two more to go, then we've got our 8 legs. Three. Four. So again, we should have, that one goes up, that one goes on top of that one. 4 different pieces that come together to form a point in the center. So now we've got our 8 legs. We can bring our attention to the tops. And as I said earlier, I'm going to mark these slightly in from the edge, so that if I find they are too wide, and these are 900 wide, we can always chop the ends off and call it good. So we're going to come in, what should we say? If we go with 600 wide, which should fit a lot of things, if we were to cut everything off the end, that means coming in 150 from each end. And just square that off. And as these are the same length, we don't need to remeasure. We can use our existing line and square that off there. And these will both be at the same point, either to each other if they're slightly different lengths, but as these are the same length, it'll be the same from each end. So we've marked out on the tops of our tops where we're going to have the legs. We're then going to, again, using our jig, set the angle at which the legs will intersect with the tops. And as this is a single bevel trestle, that angle will be 15 degrees. So we're making sure that the legs go outwards from the top. So the very top piece is the innermost part of the bevel then angles away from that point on both of the sides and both of the tops. And we're going to use the thickness of one of the legs just to make sure that we get the notch for each of the legs in the right place. Cover the line slightly and describe the other side of it. This should, because we're covering the line on one side, and we're going to cut the other line out, it should give us a nice, snug fit when we come to fit these together. So we do that on one side. And then because each piece is going to have 4 legs, we'll do the same on the other side, starting with marking out where the legs will intersect at their 15 degrees at the top. And again, using one of the legs as a reference, we're going to cover that line ever so slightly and just mark where the other side of that leg will be. So now we need to decide the thickness of the shoulder that we're going to have on the top here. Now this isn't particularly thick timber as a 3x2, but I think what we could get away with is maybe around 15 mil, something like that. Just stick with a 15 theme. So what we can do is set our square, just use as a semi-marking gauge. What do we got here? 15, 16, 17, 16, 15. We'll take that, make sure we're getting the right side. So this is the high point of the compound bevel. That will be the innermost part of the leg. So it leans inwards like that, and that should be fairly flat and in a level plane once we get it all assembled. So all we're going to do is take our marking gauge if you have one. If you don't, just take your square, whatever you're using to mark with, and just draw a line down there. Now that's going to help us with the next bit, or form the first part of the next bit. So we'll do this very quickly for all of them. There's our 4 legs done on there, and we'll do a similar thing on the tops where we'll mark out the 15 millimeter part to cut out. what I have just realised is I've done this ever so slightly wrong. In that I used the thinner part of the leg to measure out. So we're going to go back and do that bit again. We're going to actually use the part that we're going to cut into here, because it's, if we can see here, try and do this backwards, it's that way that the legs are going to sit, not that way. So I just need to make that slightly longer for each of those bits. So I'll go over this again, going to cover our line, just mark out where we're going to cut. I'm just going to scribble out the line that we don't actually want. I dropped something. Cover that one. Line. Get rid of that. And same on this side. There. Get rid of that. There. Get rid of that. Flip these over. Do the same on the opposites. Because when you make a mistake once, invariably you do it 8 times. Get rid of that. Cover the line. Mark that. Scribble that. Cover the line. Mark our piece. Cross out the bit we don't want to listen to. No, we did that wrong, because I scribbled out the wrong piece. We actually want that one. Let's do that again. So we don't want that, definitely not. We don't want that, definitely not. We do want that. Don't want that piece. So now we should have all of those done correctly, which we do now. So we've marked that. That was good. Let's go back to our 15mm shoulder that we're going to cut. We'll cut a recess for. And that's on all 4 legs for both of the trestles. That's that one. One. 2, 3, and oops, 4. So we've got our marks done. Transfer this line across, because that is where we're going to chop out. And you should hopefully find that your lines that you've marked for the legs line up on each side, which will mean that you've measured correctly. So with our tops done, what I haven't done actually is marked the other 4 legs, so we'll just do that very quickly. There is our 17, 14, 16, 4, 15. I should have done that before changing the the square, but hindsight is a wonderful thing. Now with all of those marked, we can transfer those lines, which make a bit more pronounced at the edges, down the legs to form another angle. So that's going to come down here. That's our shoulder that we want to keep, because that's the same thickness as the bit we're going to chop out. And we're going to come down roughly this far at an angle, which will be the depth of the piece that we're cutting. So these are 2x3s, as I said, they should be 38 millimeters. So we should find that if I draw a line under here, oops, let's try and do this. If I line these two pieces up, draw a line under there, that should measure 38 millimeters. And we've got 38 millimeters. Once again, using our bevel, go across there. That needs to be a that's the depth of that. The depth of the inside is what we need to measure, not the outside, because the outside is going to be ever so slightly longer. So where I was doing it backwards, we made a little bit of a boo-boo. So that inside bit there is the outside part of this bit. Nope. It's the inside part, because it's going to splay out. So the shoulder is actually on the small part, not the large part, because the large part is what needs to go on the outside, which is the bit that needs to... The large part goes on the inside because that gives us the angle. So it's the small side, the lowest point, that is going to be on the outside, and therefore the bit that needs to become the shoulder. So it's going to sit like that against the top to form our angles. So it's the lowest point that needs to become our shoulder, not the highest point. Just mark those. Okay, and again, when we make a mistake, we make it 8 times. And this is why measuring twice and cutting once, or measuring 3 times and cutting once, is a good I don't know, proverb. What do you want to call it? The other option is measure 3 times, cut once, throw it in the bin, go and buy a new piece of timber, measure a number of times again, swear you got it right, rinse and repeat until you actually get it right. So those ones are done. Mark on here. We can safely ignore the pencil marks on here, because when it gets fully assembled, if I really don't like them there, we can just sand them out. or they can act as a reminder that I've done a silly thing at some point in history. So we've got our legs now properly marked for a shoulder. With the incorrect part scribbled away. The inside bit here, where the highest point is, as that's going to sit against the top, we need to mark a line on the inside of there where that's going to sit. And we need to mark a downward angled line from there. So parallel to the top here is another line that we're going to use because it's that part that's going to get cut out. And we should find that we need to do a 15-degree angle from there and from here all the way around to get the right angle on the inside of the shoulder. So again, we're going to do that 8 times correctly. Goes along there. This should be nice. Oh, so we need to extend that one a bit more. All the way to the edge. And we should then have a parallel line going across here. It should be at 15 degrees, which we can check using our jig. Here down to here should also be 15 degrees. And from here down to here should also be 15 degrees. Marked all the way around. Need to somehow get a 15-degree from there. So we've got how are we going to get a 15-degree from there? Because it's a compound thing. 15 is roughly there. Maybe what we can do, would have been good if I'd extended this further past the edge, I think. What we'll do is use because we've got a 15 there, we'll just line up the top of that with, make sure it's flush with the top of there, and just use that as our 15-degree. Do the same on the other side here. So we need to flip that around. make sure that's lined up flush with that, using the correct shoulder, mark a line. So we should have the same line on each side now. So again, we will transfer all of our marks, get all of those to 15, that one looks parallel. So this one, we're just going to mark the correct depth for the shoulder. Board. That's our 15 degrees. That should transfer nicely around to meet the other point. Oops. This is becoming increasingly more difficult with the number of pieces that are just sitting on here. That lines up with that. That should meet that point, which it does. There is our parallel cut. And then we need to keep the small point, cut out the top point. So our 15 degrees needs to come from here down to here. So again, we're going to use one of the 15 degrees that we've cut already. Keep that relatively flush with that. Mark that line down. Flip it over and do the same thing on this side. We're going to cut away the uppermost point, leaving the lowermost point and the bulk of the shoulder there. Again, leave the lowermost point, cut away the high point and the inside of there. And we'll repeat this. We should have now 1, 2, 3. So this one is the one we're going to use now. We are going to mark our depth. Keeping the lowermost point, we want to get rid of this section here. We need to, once again, using our 15 degree angle, we're going to line up the top so they're nice and flush. Just mark a line. Down here. So we've got 4 of our legs marked out. We've got our top marked out. Just do a quick line along here at our 15mm mark. where we need to cut out. We'll do one trestle table first, make sure we've got everything right, and then we'll come back and do the other. Here's where we wish we were left-handed. Let's build ourselves a little platform. There we go. So we've got cutting on our line. All the way down. And come out onto our other line on the other side. Just for good measure, so we know that we've got the right cuts in place. That's going that way. We're going to cut one of the tops. Just so we can dry fit the legs that we've done. Make sure everything's good before we commit. So we're going to cut along here. We're just going to score this with a knife. Get a nice, hopefully clean edge. Whoops. And we'll do the same along the bottom. Now this one conveniently has a lovely big knot right where the shoulder is going to sit. And when I say convenient, I don't really mean it, because it's not convenient. We will need a hammer. So we're just going to break away these bits. Bit of a rough cut, but here's the bit we've cut. There it is. That should be a nice, snug fit. Tiny bit off from here. Just needs a fraction to come off there. Just a fraction. this chisel is not particularly sharp. This one should be a bit sharper. It's just a bit smaller. There we go. The other one was just brute forcing its way through as opposed to cutting. A good, sharp tool is always best. I mean, this one's not exactly razor sharp, but it's certainly sharper than the other one. That's a very snug fit. I'm not going to hit it with a hammer. Just give it, what does it need? Touch more just there. I say we're not going to hit it in, and then I drive it home anyway. But this is a very tight fit, which is good because that means it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So we'll cut the other bits of the legs, cut the other notches, and then we'll finish up with the legs. And then we'll do assembly. Make a couple of relief cuts. And that'll just mean when we are chiseling, we're not chiseling the whole length of the bit that's coming out. We're just going for that particular section. And it should be a lot easier. Like that. Then we can just clean this up. We can't really fit that one into there because it's the wrong side. It's not the nicest cut, but this isn't a fine piece of furniture. this is a trestle table. Oops. Built to be abused. And built knowing that my skills are not the sharpest, just like my chisels. And not paying an awful lot of attention to how clean some of these are, because it is a tool that is going to be abused. It just needs to fit and be stable enough to work with. I think one of the main drawbacks of not having somewhere to work from properly is this. Not being able to keep a piece steady, which makes sawing that little bit more difficult. We probably chose the knottiest pieces of this wood that we could. I say we, I'm blaming you all as well. As if it's your fault. And this reminds me of something I've said in a previous video about selecting where to make your cuts. I think it was with the door video, about where I had put the hinge, and I had it over a knot, and had I moved it an inch or something like that, I could have avoided the knot, and it wouldn't really have made that much difference to the door, because it only needs 2 hinges anyway, but it gave me a lot of extra effort. Similarly with this, if I had thought about where my legs were going to go in the tops, I could have moved either the placement of the legs or cut myself a different bit of timber. There we go. Again, they're very tight fits. I can always take a bit more out, but it should be fine for all of them now. So we're going to, haven't transferred the marks on that one yet. We've done that one. Not that one, not that one. We've done those ones as well. So we'll cut these out. get these in and we'll have one trestle table done. It's a very snug fit. But for a trestle table, it will do. So we've got our forelegs cut. We've got the top cut. They're all quite rough cuts, so we're not going to do many close-ups. The idea now is to fit the pieces together. We might need to give them a bit of persuading in some cases. They're all quite snug fits, which is a good thing. And we're just going to drive 2 screws into each leg just to stop them from racking. And to stop them from coming off quite so easily. That's one. This one was a bit tight a minute ago, so we might need to take a bit more off. Let's do that one once we've got all of the other ones on, and they can hopefully give us a bit of support to fix it. I'd like to put some weight on this one. Like I say, they're quite snug fit, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Three, and the last one is this bit. Bit of a tap. Drive that in, and there we've got one trestle table. What we will do is put a bit of support on here in the form of MDF. We're going to do it the cheetah's way though, and we're going to put a bit of MDF on and then cut it while it's in place. And we're not going to butt it up right against the bottom of the top, because I think that for this is unnecessary. This is not a showpiece. So all we're going to do, put that on there, fix a couple of screws, and then cut the rest off. We might put it a bit lower down, which will give me something to put underneath as well. fix this here. Again, we can drive a couple of screws in. Make sure it lines up. Nice and flush on one side. And then what we'll do is, if we can, which I don't think we're going to be able to, use this to determine where our 15 is. And that's there. So what we'll do is get a screw ready to go. Find our 15. So all I'm doing is putting the leg up against the jig, putting the 15-degree angle of the jig against the bottom of the MDF, and when it lines up, drive that in, and that should be a 15-degree. Drive another one in here. And because we're doing it the cheater's way, we're just going to cut that off where it is and not measure it out first, which should give us a nice 15 to start the next one. And this was, let's at least make them the right distance from the top. That was from there down to here. Get a screw ready. Make that flush with the outside. It just happened to be 150 mil from the corner of the MDF to the top of the shoulder. Drive that in, line that up, that's nice and flush. Drive this in. Whoops. I dropped the screw. And then we'll do the same trick with the jig again. So we'll get one screw ready to go. Get our jig. Pull that leg out, so it marries up with that. This is where we need 3 hands. That goes there. This one goes into here. And then again, we'll just cheat, cut flush with the edge of the leg. And there we have one trestle table, which hopefully carries my weight. Now, as I mentioned earlier in this video, the legs are all just standing on the corners. So you can see here there's a big gap at the back where that the bevel comes into play. So what we're going to do is just get a little scribe block, and I'm going to use a piece of what looks like about a 1/2 inch. Just needs to be enough that it meets the top there. We'll stick our pencil on. That'll give us an extra 12 mil, and just scribe around the bottom like so. And then we're going to cut this off. And all of our legs should be nice and flat when we're on a flat surface. Constantly moving things around. Three. One more around the front. Four. So I just give those a quick cut. So these ones should be a nice straight cut. Which, as long as we follow the line, will give us some nice flat feet. Oopsie. Where are we going with this one? Oops. Let's just do this one again, because that looks a bit odd. That's going around there. That's going around there. That's going around there. There we go, that's better. One of my lines was off. What we'll do here is we just raise this up slightly, so we've got a space to clear the timber when we finish the cut. It should be nice and go. And now, all being well, we should have 4 legs sitting nicely on the table. That one not so much. 3 legs sitting nicely on the table. 3 legs sitting nicely on the floor. And a good test, this may be a silly thing to do. It can hold my weight, I'm sure. Ta-da! One trestle table. Now we'll assemble the other one, and then we can start building all the other things. And if you like this video, if you'd like to see me make mistakes, or just want to join me on my journey to journeyman, please do like, subscribe, comment, all of those things. And I'll see you in the next one. And there we have 2 single bevel trestles. Job done. Thank you very much.